And so Rockefeller Center was begun as an idea of the Rockefeller advisors in the mid-1920s. By the later 1920s, they have literally bought all this property, or leased it. They've hired, as you all remember, Raymond Hood to design the buildings, and he's the guy who worked with the wet plasticine, and that's what you see there. See where the knife went in and cut out the elevator bags to make all that shapes that sort of look modern, even if it's not really a modern building and clad in old-fashioned Bloomington, Indiana limestone. Alrighty, so what Rockefeller decided to do is to not offend his friends who lived here. There were not tall buildings here. Saks was the biggest building. So his friends lived in houses, and there was St. Patrick's Cathedral where the servants worshipped. So this was his bailiwick here, and that is why, in the end, the buildings are low. They're small on Fifth Avenue, so he won't offend his friends. We're big going back to 6th Avenue, where basically, who cares? Okay? Now you remember he owns all this property, and if I gave you a marble right now and put the marble down, where's it going to go? It's going to go all the way down here to 6th Avenue. So this whole thing is an incline, which brings you to the less valuable parts of the property, which elevates the value of that part of the property. So he's literally bringing us to 6th Avenue. It, of course, helped that he managed to get the elevator line down, too. Right? So 6th Avenue is repositioned. Now, what he did was initially planned to have the opera here. As you all remember, the opera pulls out, so it's art that we're going to feature here. That's what he hid behind, art. At the very, very tippy top, because instead of being afraid of skyscrapers as we had been initially, do you remember when we talked about skyscrapers in class, we talked about how they wouldn't even rent. In that first building, the architect had to take the space. People were afraid to go up there. Now we love them. By the 30s, we think skyscrapers are terrific. We want to be at the top. And so they built a wonderful bar in that same high Art Deco style of the era called the Rainbow Room. And the bar-restaurant was at the top. There was a huge outdoor grill. And you could go outside and stand and watch the city below, and it had among the best perspectives because it's only 65 stories. Now, I remember the World Trade Tower. When you would go up to the deck at the top of the World Trade Tower and you didn't have perfect weather, guess what? You saw your own reflection. Here, the clouds don't come so low, so you always get a good vista, almost always. So the deck and the observation room up here and the Rainbow Room were absolutely wonderful. They were designed in a high style of that time period. They were terrific, but they ran into economic difficulties in the more recent years. The restaurant up here was revived, remodeled, semi-ruined, opened again. They even had a a Rockefeller Center Businessmen's Club up here, which is also just closed. So the food end has pretty much closed, but it was pretty terrific. If you took a guest from out of town, you would go up there, yes, the drink was overpriced, but the whole room was mirrored. So what you could do is see the city below from the mirror above where you see it's just magical to newcomers to New York City. So we do hope that the Rainbow Room eventually comes back. There is now an observatory reopening on top of the main building, but it's very expensive, so I think we will wait and hope that the Rainbow Room opens and you at least get to drink something while you're watching the city below. Yeah. Okay, St. Patrick's Cathedral. Gothic Cathedral, does it look like a building you've seen before on smaller scale with only one spire? Yeah, in 10th Street, absolutely. It looks exactly like Renwick's Grace Church, and that's because it's Renwick's St. Pat's. Wait. This is a very big building. Built in the late 1960s, early 1970s. It's among the first condominiums in New York. What does it mean when you have a condominium?
You own the paint-in or the...
You own your unit, as opposed to owning shares in a corporation.
Oh, right.
Now, part of the reason for this is what are co-op boards famous for doing?
Keeping people out so they don't want...
That's it. So in a condominium, if you've got the financials, there's not much they can do with you.
What do you say they're famous for?
Kicking out people they don't want. Now, this building was built by the Greek shipping magnate, at this point airline company owner, Aristotle Onassis, thought in the late 60s to be one of the richest people in the world. He took this property here, bought it. It had been a famous children's store, Best & Company, ask your grandparents. He bought the store in the 1950s, late 1960s, tore down everything, and came up with a tall building concept, which New York City then helped by providing a tax benefit if you built residential units as well as commercial office units. Here we are in what had been an unopened wall, with another unopened wall here, and it was a dark corridor, totally unfitted out, hanging raw light electrical cords. There was nothing here, but Olympic Towers was forced then, about 20 years after the building had been occupied, to create an atrium. So this is an atrium, and it is, yeah, here we are, the rules of the condo. What you cannot do in here, you can't sleep, you can't, we all know some of the issues about internal atria spaces. After we had open atriums like Lever and Seagram, where we were last week, the next phase was to have indoor ones exactly for days like this. City Core has that enormous one, as you know. Part of the issue is, if you have an atrium space, do you have commercial tenants? Well, they do here. Do the commercial tenants always manage to succeed in these spaces? Often not. Most of the time, these places don't succeed. Okay, what is the great new device of internal courtyards? We haven't seen one yet, but it starts with Paley Park, a little Vestpocket Park right up the street here, which is now, my God, 40 years old. Okay, how do you dim the sound? And we're going to see this again at Donald Trump's. What was the thing to do in internal courtyards by the 1980s? Waterfall. Mr. McGrath has it. Okay, find that waterfall. Okay. What does a waterfall do? It dims, it's white, that's literally the word, it's white noise. It dims the sound, dims the street, takes you out of the idea that you're in the middle of a very difficult urban environment. So this waterfall and this atrium space is a retrofitting. It was done later. It includes this curious set of very early casts of the Parthenon frieze and the Parthenon pediment sculpture that had belonged at one point to City College and was given by Aristotle Onassis in memory of his dead 25-year-old son whose plane crashed at one point to NYU. And in a way, the stories I don't understand, somehow it ended up here. The story on these casts is they're very early. So a lot of the detail is still here that's lost on the contemporary pieces. So it's an important collection if you're ever studying the ancient world. Built about 1900, finished about 1900. Originally with a moat, the kind of moats we saw on the Upper West Side, an alleyway. And the architect, 8 years later, in order to widen Fifth Avenue, they widened the street and pushed the sidewalk in and ended the moat, ended the areaway. And the designer of the building said it just ruined the proportion of the front of the building, and he had to live long enough to see that happen. Okay, the club was for men up until very recently who'd had some schooling of some sort, and the main library-big padded chair space is right in here. And what are they doing now as they see us on the other side of the window? Smiling. Smiling, and they're saying, as Ms. Painter correctly noted, hi, I'm in here and you're not. So this is the role of the club in its day. It's a very beautiful building, by the way. If you ever have a chance, they have a swimming pool. I've never been down there because they let the men swim with no bathing suits. So I've never been able to see Charles McKiss. We saw that there, remember at City Hall that day? Okay, that's the Rockefeller block. The Rockefellers own those warehouses over there. In fact, that is where Nelson Rockefeller died. No laughter. You all don't remember that, thank goodness. Okay.